The sun was a searing orange disk, bleeding across the vast, unforgiving landscape of New Mexico. For 10-year-old Ilara, the heat was a constant companion, as familiar as the gnawing hunger in her belly. She clutched a worn leather pouch, its contents a meager handful of salvaged coins and a half-eaten biscuit, all that remained of her life savings. Orphaned a year ago when the cholera swept through their small, dust-choked settlement, Ilara had learned to survive on the fringes, invisible to the world. She wore a dress made of faded calico, patched so many times it resembled a mosaic of forgotten fabrics. Her face, smudged with dirt, was thin, her eyes large, and a hauntingly deep shade of blue that seemed to hold the endless sky within them. Her journey was aimless, a weary trudge from one dusty town to the next, hoping for a day's work, a plate of food, a kind word. Today, however, her luck seemed to be a cruel joke. She had been turned away from a saloon where she'd hoped to sweep floors, and the general store owner had eyed her with suspicion, shooing her away before she could even ask for a scrap of food. With the last dregs of her strength, she saw a flicker of hope on the horizon. A sprawling ranch, a place of order and prosperity in a land of chaos. It was the Starlight Ranch, known for its massive herds and its reclusive owner Silas Caldwell. Whispers about him were as numerous as the stars, but all agreed on one thing. He was a man of immense wealth and influence, and a man who kept to himself. As dusk settled, painting the sky in fiery streaks of crimson and gold, Ilara crept closer. The ranch was silent, a strange stillness hanging in the air. She passed the corrals where a few horses stamped their hooves restlessly, and the bunkhouse, which was eerily quiet. A sense of unease coiled in her stomach. This was not the bustling, lively place she had imagined. Pushing a rickety gate open, she entered the main barn, hoping to find a place to rest for the night, maybe even a loose bale of hay. The air inside was thick with the scent of dried hay and old leather. A single lantern, left precariously on a wooden crate, cast long dancing shadows. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed a strange shape huddled in the corner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a man, bound and gagged, his body racked with silent shivers. His clothes were of fine quality, but torn and covered in dust. He had a strong jaw, set in a line of grim determination, and his dark eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and rage, found hers in the dim light. They were the most intense eyes she had ever seen. The man's muffled grunts were a desperate plea. He was a prisoner in his own barn. Ilara's first instinct was to flee, to run back into the safety of the dark night. But she saw something in his gaze that mirrored her own desperation, a shared understanding of being alone in a hostile world. He needed help. Despite her fear, she moved forward, her small hands trembling as she fumbled with the ropes. She saw a deep gash on his forehead and a slow-spreading dark stain on his shirt. He was hurt, badly. With great effort, she managed to untie the knot on his wrists. The man, a groan of relief escaping his lips, immediately pulled the gag from his mouth. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper. You found me," he said, his eyes never leaving her face. He struggled to sit up, his movements stiff and pained. "Who are you?" "Ilara," she whispered back, her voice barely a breath. A small, involuntary smile touched her lips, a rare, fleeting expression of relief that he was safe, that she had helped. It was a genuine smile, unburdened by the hardship she had faced. It was simply the look of a child who had done a good thing. The man, who she now realized was Silas Caldwell, stared at her. His face, etched with pain and exhaustion, softened. His gaze was no longer one of desperation, but of profound surprise. He had expected to see fear, maybe even greed, in the eyes of a stranger. Instead, he saw a purity that seemed impossible in this harsh world. His life, a fortress of solitude and mistrust, was about to be turned upside down by a 10-year-old girl and her simple, kind smile. He reached out a hand, calloused and trembling, and took hold of hers. "Thank you," he said, the words heavy with a sincerity that felt alien to him. "Thank you, little one." He then leaned back against the wall, the pain finally catching up to him, and passed out. Ilara was left alone once more, this time with a mystery in the form of a wealthy rancher, his life now in her small hands. The night had just begun. Ilara sat beside Silas, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. The silent barn felt immense and full of unseen threats. A small cut on her finger from the rope was a stark reminder of her recent act of bravery. She had to act. She couldn't leave him. Not now. Not after she had freed him. She saw a canteen hanging on a nearby hook, and after a moment's hesitation, filled a cup with water and gently dabbed at the gash on Silas's forehead with a piece of her dress. The cold water seemed to revive him slightly, and he stirred, groaning softly. His eyes fluttered open, his focus slowly returning to the small figure beside him. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice a little stronger now. "I couldn't leave you," Ilara replied, her voice filled with an earnestness that struck him to his core. Silas pushed himself up, his muscles protesting with every move. "They came for me in the middle of the night," he explained, his gaze distant, as if reliving the moment. "My foreman, Cole, and 2 others. They wanted the deed to the ranch. I refused." He shook his head, a grim smile on his lips. "I didn't think he had it in him. Cole, I trusted him." Ilara's own experience with betrayal was limited, but she understood the sting of broken trust. She was a child, but her life had taught her the harsh realities of the world. She reached out and touched his hand, a small, comforting gesture. "What do we do?" Silas looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw not a dirty orphan girl, but a resolute, brave soul. He saw a flicker of himself in her, a fierce independence and a deep-seated distrust of others, yet a willingness to help when needed. "We wait," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They'll be back. They think I'm weak, that I'll give in, but I won't." He paused, his eyes scanning the barn. "We need to get to the main house. There's a rifle there, and a first aid kit." He struggled to his feet, a silent grimace on his face. Ilara, without a second thought, put her small shoulder against his side, trying to help support his weight. It was a futile gesture, but one that spoke volumes. He leaned on her, and together they moved toward the main house, a silent, mismatched pair. The moon had risen, casting a silver light over the ranch. Each step was a tense, silent prayer that no one would see them. The cold night air was a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the day, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. They made it to the back porch of the main house. The door was unlocked, a sign of Cole's arrogance, of his belief that Silas was defeated. Silas led Ilara inside. The house was a testament to his wealth, rich mahogany furniture, a grand fireplace, and thick wool rugs. It was a stark contrast to Ilara's life of poverty and exposure. Silas retrieved a rifle from a locked cabinet and a first aid kit from a small desk drawer. He then motioned for her to sit in a large plush armchair. "Stay here," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I need to clean this wound." As he worked, his hands, though large and calloused, were surprisingly gentle. He cleaned the cut on his forehead and the puncture wound on his arm, wincing with pain but never showing it on his face. Ilara watched him, her small heart filled with a mixture of fear and fascination. This man, who had everything, was now dependent on her. "What about you?" he asked, noticing her staring. "Where are your folks?" Ilara's expression clouded over. "They're gone. The sickness took them," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A year ago. I've been traveling." Silas's face hardened. He understood. His own life had been built on a foundation of loss and hardship, a fact his immense wealth couldn't erase. He saw a kindred spirit in the little girl. He finished bandaging his arm and looked at her. "From now on, this is your home, Ilara. You're not traveling anymore." The words hung in the air. A promise, a lifeline. Ilara looked at him, her eyes welling up with tears. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. It was a hope as bright and fragile as a newly lit candle in the vast, unforgiving night. The following morning, the ranch felt like a ghost town. Cole and his men were nowhere to be seen. Silas, still in pain but determined, began to set a plan in motion. He and Ilara had spent the night talking, their two lives so different, now inextricably linked. He learned of her resourcefulness, her resilience, and her quiet strength. He saw in her the kind of person he had long forgotten existed. Silas contacted the local sheriff, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Sheriff Brody. Brody listened to Silas's account, his face a mask of disbelief. "Cole, the best foreman on the county? You must be mistaken, Silas." "I am not," Silas said, his voice hard as stone. "I saw him, Brody. He had a brand-new Colt revolver. He knew where to find the deed, and he knew I kept it under lock and key." Sheriff Brody agreed to look into it, but his skepticism was clear. Silas knew he couldn't rely solely on the law. He had to prepare. He spent the day fortifying the ranch house, boarding up windows and checking his rifles. Ilara, quiet but attentive, followed him like a shadow, handing him tools and supplies. She had a keen eye, and he was surprised by her ability to spot things he had missed. During a break, Silas turned to her. "Ilara, why did you risk your life for a stranger? You could have been hurt." Ilara thought for a moment. "My mama always said to help those who need it no matter what. She said kindness is the only thing you can give that nobody can take away from you." Silas felt a pang in his heart. It had been a long time since he had heard such a simple, beautiful sentiment. He had built his walls high and thick after his wife's death, believing that trust only led to pain. Ilara's small act of kindness had shattered those walls, leaving him vulnerable, but also, strangely, feeling a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years. He saw her as a reflection of the goodness he had lost. Cole, however, was not one to be underestimated. He and his men returned that evening. They surrounded the house, their faces grim in the fading light. "Silas, we know you're in there." Cole's voice was loud and confident. "Hand over the deed and we'll let you go. No one has to get hurt." Silas stepped onto the porch, his rifle in his hands. "Cole, you betrayed me. I'm not giving you a single blade of grass. You chose your path. Now face the consequences." Cole scoffed. "You're a foolish old man, Silas. We'll take what's ours." As a tense standoff ensued, Ilara, who had been hiding inside, heard a faint sound. A floorboard squeak. She looked around, her small eyes scanning the room. She noticed a side window, slightly ajar, that Silas had forgotten to secure. Two men were trying to sneak in. Without a second thought, she grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the kitchen, and with a surprising burst of strength, she slammed the skillet against the window, shattering the glass and making a loud clatter. Silas and Cole's heads whipped around. Cole's men were startled, their plan of a silent entry ruined. Silas, seeing the broken window and the surprised look on his men's faces, knew exactly what had happened. He had the advantage. He aimed his rifle, firing a shot into the air to signal to Sheriff Brody that something was afoot. The distant sound of a single gunshot cut through the silence. Cole, realizing he had lost the element of surprise, panicked. "Let's go! We'll be back, Silas!" he shouted, and he and his men rode off into the night. Silas, his heart pounding, turned to Ilara. "You saved us," he said, his voice filled with awe and gratitude. He had spent his life building a fortune, but it had taken a 10-year-old girl to truly protect it. The simple act of her courage had shown him that he was not alone anymore. The next day, Sheriff Brody returned with a posse. The broken window and the accounts from Silas and Ilara were enough to convince him that Cole was a traitor. They found evidence of Cole's plans, a map of the ranch with strategic points marked, a letter to an unknown party detailing his intentions to sell the land once he had the deed. The evidence was irrefutable. Cole and his men were outlaws now, wanted by the law. With the immediate danger gone, Silas could finally rest. He was still in pain, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to the emotional ones. He sat on the porch watching the sunset. a cup of coffee in his hands. Ilara sat beside him, sketching in the dust with a twig. "What are you drawing?" he asked, his voice soft. "The ranch," she replied, her face concentrating. "And the barn, and the house." Silas smiled. "It's a good drawing. You're a good artist, Ilara." "My mama taught me," she said, her voice filled with a sad longing. Silas realized the depth of her grief and loneliness. He also realized the depth of his own. He had spent years in self-imposed exile, burying his sorrow in work and solitude. Ilara's presence had brought a flicker of light into his life, a warmth he hadn't known he needed. He turned to her, his gaze serious. "Ilara, I want you to stay here. Not just for a few days, but forever. I want to adopt you, to be your guardian." Ilara's eyes widened, her twig falling from her hand. You mean it?" "I do," Silas said, his voice firm. "I don't have a family. You don't have one either. We could be one. This ranch, this home, it's yours too now." A tear traced a path down Ilara's dusty cheek. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with an emotion she hadn't felt in a long time. Love. It was the promise of a future, a home, a family. She threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, please." Silas hugged her back, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. He realized that in his grief and his bitterness, he had been a prisoner on his own land. Ilara, with her simple kindness, had freed him. She had not only saved his life, but had given him a reason to live again. The lonely rancher and the orphaned girl had found a family in each other, a family built on courage, compassion, and a shared understanding of what it meant to be alone. Life at the Starlight Ranch settled into a rhythm. Ilara, no longer the silent, fearful orphan, blossomed. She was a quick learner, helping Silas with the ranch books, learning to ride a horse, and even helping to train some of the new hands. Her laughter, once a rare sound, now echoed through the main house, a constant melody that filled the empty spaces of Silas's life. Silas, in turn, became more open, more like the man he had been before tragedy struck. He taught Ilara about the land, about raising cattle, and about the harsh but beautiful realities of the West. He hired new hands, trustworthy men he had known for years, men who respected him and Ilara, but the peace was a fragile thing. Cole had not forgotten his goal. The word on the street was that he was amassing a gang, and he was coming back. Sheriff Brody warned Silas to be careful. The ranch was now a target, not just for its wealth, but for revenge. Silas knew it was coming. He doubled his security, built a new fence, and taught Ilara how to handle a rifle. She was a natural shot, her small hands steady and her aim true. One evening, as a storm brewed on the horizon, Ilara was practicing her shooting at tin cans. Silas watched her, a mixture of pride and fear in his heart. He had given her a new life, but he had also brought her into his world of danger. He felt the weight of that responsibility. "What's wrong, Papa?" she asked, calling him by the name she had started to use. The word Papa was a balm to his soul. It was a word he never thought he would hear again. "Nothing, sweetheart," he lied. "Just proud of you." A loud clap of thunder and a flash of lightning split the sky. A chill ran down Silas's spine. The air was thick with the scent of rain and a palpable sense of foreboding. He knew it wasn't just the storm. It was Cole. He could feel it in his bones. He had a premonition, not of a supernatural kind, but of a very real, very dangerous kind. "Get inside, Ilara," he said, his voice tense. "Now." As they hurried back to the house, they saw them. A dozen riders, their silhouettes stark against the stormy sky, were approaching the ranch, Cole's men. Ilara's hand instinctively reached for the rifle at her side. Her small frame was tense, but her eyes were filled with a quiet determination that mirrored Silas's own. The battle for the Starlight Ranch, for their new family, was about to begin. The storm broke as Cole's gang reached the ranch. Rain lashed down, turning the ground to mud and obscuring vision. It was a perfect cover for Cole's attack. the air filled with the deafening cracks of thunder, punctuated by the sharp reports of gunshots. Silas and his men were ready, taking cover behind the reinforced walls of the ranch house. Ilara, tucked safely in a reinforced pantry, listened to the chaos outside. Silas, a seasoned fighter, was a force to be reckoned with. He moved from window to window, his rifle a blur of motion. His years of experience in the cavalry had not faded. He was defending more than just land and money. He was defending his family, his new purpose. Cole, however, was cunning. He had split his men into two groups, one attacking from the front, the other attempting to flank them from the side. The ranch hands were holding their own, but they were outnumbered. Silas needed to create a diversion. He had an idea. He looked toward the barn, now a silhouette in the rain-soaked darkness. He motioned to one of his men, Jake, a loyal old ranch hand with a grizzled beard. "Get to the barn, start a fire. Nothing big, just enough to draw their attention." Jake nodded and, under the cover of a flash of lightning, slipped out the back door. The plan worked. The fire, small at first, grew quickly, casting an eerie orange glow. Cole and his men, distracted by the blaze, focused their fire on the barn, giving Silas and his men the opening they needed. From her hiding spot, Ilara saw a flash of movement outside. Cole himself, on foot, was trying to sneak around the back to an unguarded side door. He was a shadow in the rain, moving fast. Ilara's heart pounded. She knew she had to do something. She had a small, old pistol that Silas had given her, a small but reliable weapon. She had never fired it at a person before, but the thought of Cole getting to Silas made her stomach clench. She slowly opened the pantry door, a sliver of light illuminating her face. She raised the pistol, her hands steady, her eyes focused. She took a deep breath, remembered Silas's words about aiming for the shoulder, not to kill but to incapacitate. The shot she fired was deafening in the close quarters, the sound swallowed almost instantly by a clap of thunder. Cole let out a cry of pain as the bullet hit his shoulder. He stumbled and fell, his gun flying from his hand. The commotion was enough to alert Silas. He raced to the side door, seeing Cole on the ground. He put the barrel of his rifle to Cole's head. "It's over, Cole," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Cole, writhing in pain, looked up at him with a mix of hatred and a newfound respect. "You were right, Silas. I shouldn't have underestimated you." Silas didn't reply. He had no words for the man who had been a friend and had tried to take everything from him. The sound of distant sirens pierced the air, and soon Sheriff Brody and his posse were on the scene. They rounded up Cole's men, their faces grim and defeated. The storm had passed, leaving behind a stillness that was broken only by the sound of falling rain from the eaves of the house. Silas looked at Ilara, who was standing in the doorway, the pistol still in her hand. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with a steely resolve. He walked over to her, his heart filled with a profound love and admiration. He took the pistol from her hand. "You saved me again," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Ilara didn't reply. She just hugged him, her body shaking from the adrenaline. He held her close, a silent promise to protect her, no matter the cost. He knew that the battle was won, but the war for their peace of mind would be a long one. He had faced down his enemies, but now he had to face the man he had become and the man he was becoming because of this small, brave girl. In the aftermath of the attack, the community rallied around Silas and Ilara. News of the betrayal and the subsequent siege had spread like wildfire. The town of Redemption, a short ride from the ranch, was filled with whispers and tales of the little orphan girl who had saved the rich rancher. People who had once viewed Silas with suspicion and Ilara with pity now saw them in a new light. One day, the local church pastor, Reverend Davis, a kind and wise man, came to the ranch. He found Silas and Ilara sitting on the porch, watching the ranch hands mend the fences. The sun was warm on their faces, a stark contrast to the cold, wet night of the attack. "Silas," the Reverend said, his voice soft, "the town wants to help. They want to show their support. We want to host a picnic at the church in your honor and to welcome Ilara as one of our own." Silas, who had always shunned such gatherings, was hesitant. He had spent his life building a wall between himself and the rest of the world. But he looked at Ilara, her eyes shining with excitement at the thought of a community gathering, and he knew he had to accept. "That's very kind, Reverend. We'd be honored." The picnic was a huge success. The townspeople came with baskets of food and warm smiles. Ilara, dressed in a new bright blue dress that Silas had bought for her, was the center of attention. She met children her age, and for the first time she had friends. She laughed, she played, she ran through the fields, a symbol of hope and resilience. Silas, watching her from a distance, felt his heart swell with pride. He shook hands with the men, their words of support a balm to his soul. He had always been the rich recluse, the man who had everything but trusted no one. Now he was a pillar of the community, a man who had faced adversity and had, with the help of a child, found his way back to humanity. A few days later, Sheriff Brody returned to the ranch. He had news. Cole had been sentenced to a long stretch in prison, and his men were either in jail or had fled the territory. The legal battle for the ranch was over. The Starlight Ranch was safe, and so was Silas's life. He had found a new family, a new purpose, and a new life, all because of a 10-year-old girl and her simple act of kindness. Years brought peace and prosperity to the Starlight Ranch. Ilara blossomed, her blue eyes still holding the depth of the sky, her spirit as fierce as ever. She became Silas's partner, managing finances and new projects with a sharp mind. Silas, now an older man with grey hair, found immense joy watching her grow. The scars of his past had healed, replaced by a love that transcended blood. He often thought of the day he was tied in the barn, a prisoner of his own bitterness, and how her pure smile had been the first ray of light in years. Ilara, now a young adult, found herself often thinking about that day as well. The memory wasn't of fear, but of profound hope. She had not only saved a man, but had found a father, a home, and a purpose. One evening on the porch, she turned to Silas. "Papa," she said, "why do you think I chose to help you that day?" Silas's eyes filled with love. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I'm grateful you did. You gave me back my life and a reason to live it." Ilara smiled, a smile filled with the wisdom and love she had accumulated over the years. It was the same smile that had captured his heart, a smile with the power to change a life and build a new family from the ashes of a tragic past. As Ilara grew, her reputation for being a formidable young woman spread. Many came to court her, but her focus remained on the ranch and her bond with Silas. Her heart, however, was not immune to the quiet affection of Liam, a hard-working ranch hand with kind eyes. He had been with the ranch for years, and his quiet respect and small acts of kindness drew her in. One afternoon, as they worked together, Ilara said, "You've been a good friend, Liam." He looked at her, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "I'd like to be more than a friend, if you'd let me." Ilara's face broke into a smile. Their connection was a slow, steady burn, built on years of trust and mutual respect. She told Silas, a little nervous about his reaction, but he was nothing but happy for her. He saw the genuine love in Liam's eyes and gave them his blessing. The ranch, once a symbol of Silas's solitude, was now becoming a place of new beginnings, of love and family. The wounds of the past had healed, replaced by the promise of a bright future they were building together. Years passed. The Starlight Ranch became a landmark of prosperity and resilience. Silas, now a grandfather, spent his days on the porch, watching the new generation grow. His hair was white, his face a map of a life well lived. He was a man content who had faced his past and walked into the light. Ilara and Liam raised their children on the ranch, teaching them the values of hard work and kindness. They would tell them the story of their family's beginning, a lost girl, a lonely man, and a simple, genuine smile. One evening, Ilara sat with Silas, holding his hand. "That day I found you," she said, "I was so scared, but when you looked at me, I saw a person just as lost as I was, and I wasn't scared anymore." Silas smiled, a slow, peaceful smile. "And that's why I looked at you. Your smile was the first bit of light I'd seen in a very long time. It was the moment my life stopped being upside down and started to be right side up." He looked out at the star-filled sky, now a blanket of comfort. He closed his eyes, his heart filled with gratitude. The rich rancher had been found by a poor orphan, and in the end it wasn't the ranch or the money, but her simple, kind smile that had saved his life and given him everything. It was a legacy of love, a testament that even in the most desolate of landscapes, a single act of kindness can build a beautiful, lasting family.